I've got 35 charts, okay? So, and I take about 10 minutes per chart. So that's 350 minutes. That's quite a long time. So I'm going to try and rush. I'll rush a little bit anyway. When Paul asked me to come to speak today, I said no, obviously, as you would. You know, if this guy asks you, you know, you're bound to say no, really. But I have a very deep and abiding interest, and I'm going to be serious occasionally, okay? And I'm going to attempt humor for some of the other, you know, bits of this 30 minutes. But anyway, when Paul asked me, I said yes, because I have a long and abiding interest in the boundary between science, art, design, and indeed engineering. Because my view of the world, obviously created over many, many years, as you can see, is that it's at those boundaries that real change and real innovation happens. So again, thanks, Paul, for inviting me to come today. It's great to be at the London College of Fashion. As you rightly said, I am a visiting prof at Central St Martin's, another part of UAL. So anyway, what I'm going to do is just give you some perspectives. This is scene setting for the later, more in-depth reviews of where we stand with respect to clothes, technology, and indeed you'll hear later on about the psychology of clothes. I am a scientist, so again, I apologize for yet again showing a DNA molecule. However, this is my DNA. I know that it's my DNA because it's not damaged by UV, but it is damaged on chromosome 21 there's a mutation. It's a disappointment gene. Okay, so I have a disappointment gene, and it's on there. You can't quite make it out, but it's there, and it comes from supporting a particular football club. Well, shall I tell you which one it is? I support a football club called Sunderland, and Sunderland was in the Premiership and has very, very quickly gone through the next division down and is now going into the next division down, and I think it'll probably end up right at the bottom of the football pyramid. So anyway, I'm a scientist and I've got a mutation. So I'm prepared for disappointment. I'm preparing you for it now. I show this one to build a little bit of business credibility, and I'm sure there's a red thingy. Yeah, there is. And I show it for one reason only. This is my company that I was at Procter & Gamble for many years. I show it for one reason. I joined the company there, which, as you can all tell, is somewhere close to the bottom. And I left it up here, and it continued to increase up there, so I left it in 2012. So for the purpose of this exercise, the whole of that growth in Procter & Gamble you can attribute exclusively to me. It had nothing to do with Paul. It had absolutely nothing to do with the other 100,000 people who work at Procter & Gamble. It was all to do with me, right? So that's my business credibility. Oh, I should say one other thing. I went on holiday. And I had a weekend off. It was very, very rare to have weekends off at PG. Anyway, that's my business credibility. My most recent, in theory, credibility is that I have been the director, and was very honored to be the director of the National Innovation Centre for Aging at Newcastle University. This building is being built now, right now as we speak, and I've been the first director of this initiative between government and the university. It is a national centre, and it's intended, frankly, for our ageing society, not just, honestly, in the UK, but elsewhere in the world as well, to build them new products and services which help them live better lives for longer. And quite honestly, I'll talk a little bit later about clothes in that context, just in passing, but we have a duty to make life better for older people. There are more of them across the world than there ever have been before. That number is increasing year on year, and we have a duty to deliver things that are good for them. And here I'm not talking about necessarily medicine or health. I'm talking about their whole life, from when they get up in the morning until when they go to bed at night. So I've been that, and I'm still involved with the university in quite a considerable way, but that was my latest thing. Okay, right. However, in the context of this talk, I'm going to focus particularly on something that I had nearly 31 years dealing with off and on, and that is clothes. And the way in which we look at clothes, I'll set some of the scene, and I'll be somewhat challenging. I'll also talk a little bit about innovation and where new stuff comes from in general. And then I'll talk about clothes and where some of the changes that are happening in our world might start to impact on clothes and fashion. Right, let's get started. We'll talk second skin and give a bit of a snapshot. Then we'll talk about change that's happening, and then we'll talk about how that change can sort of engage with our second skin. And by the way, I should say, in some of these charts that I have here, it's quite revealing and quite challenging and quite concerning to hear of all the issues that were described this morning in terms of the way in which people feel about themselves in their hearts when they have problems concerned with their skin, and how that might, could, should be reflected in the way we, as people who deal with the second skin, reflect on our work. It was quite challenging for me anyway. And this is one of the reasons why I did a little bit of research. I've done quite a lot of research on this subject, and 1.8 trillion, that's the size of the apparel market in the world. $1.8 trillion. Just let that sink in. That's an enormous number. In fact, one remarkable number is that the size of the bridal wear business in the world is $57 billion. Can you imagine what difference that would make to one of your charities? Or at least, just 1% of that would make to one of those charities. It's a very interesting thing that the clothes business has so much value in it. And all it's doing really is covering and making us feel good. And yet many of the things that we're talking about this morning are about people feeling good about themselves through improving their health in the context of dermatology. That's a remarkable number. This is another remarkable number. I mean, there are many big companies. LVMH, is bigger than this, but Nike's turnover revenues are around $35 billion. Enormous companies in this field. There are 550 million people in the world. Let me just make sure I get this right. 550 million people in the world who work in areas relating to clothing and textiles. And 97 billion is the size of this market, which is not the clothing market, but is the clothing treatment market. And the quite remarkable thing about this, of course, is that that's how they end up. So things that people see as fashionable, when they take them off, they're not fashionable at all. In fact, a lot of my career was concerned with providing these kinds of products for that pile of stuff. Isn't it weird? But it's 97 billion is the value of that market. So not only do we have 1.8 trillion in the clothing market, we've got 97 billion in the detergent market. We've even got 40 billion in the washing machine market, which wouldn't be there, of course, if it wasn't for clothes and it wasn't for detergents. So that's another enormous market. So there's this huge economic cycle here that relates to the things that you are working on, many of you will be working on, that all of us use, and that relate to this second skin concept, when in reality, they're just covering our first skin. There's always a problem, and there are many by the way, there are many problems associated with those numbers I've just described. particularly in a world where a sense of purpose is becoming more important to more and more young people, where a recognition of issues of the planet are becoming more and more in the public awareness. 20 to 40,000. That's how much water is used. Water is used to produce 1 kilogram of cotton. 20 to 40,000 litres of water used to produce 1 kilogram of cotton. In a world where in many, many places, and admittedly it's not in the same places, which is one of the big issues, where water scarcity is a problem and will be becoming even more of a problem. Some of the sustainability issues to do with the chemistry of clothes, to do with the chemistry of washing machines, and of course the chemistry of detergents, they can be put on top of this issue, but that's just one issue. 20 to 40,000 litres of water used for 1 kilogram of cotton. Now that's just some of the background within which the businesses that we're operating in, they play. Now, they all have to respond to change. And they respond to change through, generally speaking, through innovation. Now the question is, well, where does innovation come from? And I'll just take a couple of minutes to speak to that subject. Then I'll talk about the changes that are happening which could influence all of the things that are going on with respect to our second skin. And there are a lot of changes happening that could influence the way we look and feel, and the way we feel about our second skin. Well, innovative change comes from all over the place. And I'm not going to go through this chart in detail, but I'm going to pick out one or two things. By the way, you can have all these charts. I'm big on open sourced presentations, if you want them. We often talk about technology pushing stuff, so in the context of, you'll hear some considerable stuff later on in much more detail about materials, but does everybody know what that is? It's graphene. And graphene is a technology of remarkable properties, and the question is, how can we use it? And the question, of course, in that context is, how can we use it in our second skin? And indeed, how can we use it to get rid of some of the issues that our second skin is producing? Because graphene could well be of considerable use in water purification and other things that will make that issue of 20 to 40,000 a little bit easier. But there's not a lot of technology push that actually goes on in the innovative change world. There is often, oops, it is, sorry. There is often quite a bit of work that goes on in the context of, let me just, there, consumer pull. So for example, there was quite a big issue with this area of the neck in the context of the way in which razors operated, and this razor is considerably better in terms of helping in this area, which is in technical terms called the Y zone. So there was some consumer pull for an improvement in performance of razors here. This one's an interesting one, watching others. Oh, sorry about this. I'll just go back. I won't use the pointer. The watching others thing. Innovation often comes from watching others. You all know this, I mean, because you'll spend your lives watching others in the context of fashion and fashion design, those people who are in fashion and fashion design. That's just an example there of Southwest Airlines in the United States have a very fast turnaround in their planes. When they land, they turn around really, really quickly, and much quicker than anywhere else. It's a competitive advantage. How have they done that? Well, they use algorithms which were presented to them originally by Renault. And Renault have those algorithms from their pit stop turnaround times, which are some of the best in the world. And those algorithms are of great value in the context of Southwest Airlines turnaround. Indeed, McLaren's algorithms, that's another car company, they are used to determine the position of planes at Heathrow. So by watching what other people were doing, it was possible for the National Air Traffic Control Service in the UK or Southwest Airlines in the US to say to themselves, I wonder if we could use that technology in our issue. And watching others is one way of doing that. System shocks, I mean, whether you like it or not, you're all gonna, it doesn't matter whether you work in fashion or not, you're all gonna become aware of things like 5G and blockchain. You'll become aware of blockchain, arguably, because more and more people, more and more consumers will want to understand the provenance of the clothes that they begin to wear. In order for you to be able to tell the provenance of the clothes that they wear, then you will need to use blockchain or possibly quantum computing. Trust me, these are technologies which will have systemic shocks on all sorts of different businesses, including the business of our second skin. Finally, extreme demands and extreme users. Have we got any skateboarders in the room? Well, that's remarkable. I normally ask that question and I've never seen anybody answer that. I don't know who skateboards, but they're never in my presentations. Anyway, skateboard manufacturers, what they do is they watch those extreme users of skateboards, because those extreme users, they modify the wheels, they change the design of the skateboard to make it more aerodynamic, they add coatings, they do all sorts of changes to the skateboard in order to improve performance. If those changes look like they might be of common value, then what happens is that the big businesses essentially take those changes and apply them to their products. And it is a very interesting thing to ask the question in what you do. Are you watching people who are extreme users of particular kinds of fabrics, particular kinds of clothes, particular activities? Because you might learn a great deal from them that is innovative. And by the way, other things will have huge effect on novelty. I'm thinking particularly of regulation. I mean, it isn't impossible to imagine that as we move ahead, there'll be enormous numbers of regulations that relate to the second skin. Let's just briefly go through some of the changes that are happening in the world. And I will do this relatively briefly. Yeah. And I'm going to talk technology, a little bit on demographics, a bit on the developing world, something about communities, and then some broader drivers. Very briefly, there is amazing technological change happening to us, and all of it will be relevant to the second skin. The question is how? 3D printing, in fact, I think somebody's talking about 3D printing this afternoon. 3D printing of everything is going to be almost commonplace over the next 5 to 10 years. In fact, there's quite a lot of work going on in the food business. 3D printing of hamburgers, that's not an impossibility, by the way. Trust me, it's not an impossibility. 3D printing of chocolate is a particular interest to me. I like chocolate. Robotics and all of the use of robotics, particularly in the context of our second skin, to replace some of the sweatshop concepts that have been around for many, many years. I mean, robots are expensive to buy but cheap to use. Machine learning and big data in the context of deciding which clothes you might want to buy. And indeed, already machine learning is being used by Amazon and others to direct you to things that you might like. That's going to be more and more common over the next 10 years. VR and AR with respect to buying and choosing our second skin. And the IoT, I'm not entirely sure how the Internet of Things will be of value in this context, but I'm pretty sure there'll be people in this room who could tell me. All of those things in technological change are going to impact on the business of clothes, the business of washing clothes, the business of indeed producing the fibers that clothes are made from. The world's changing rapidly as well. Let me just pick on one thing, okay? And this is a personal interest to me. I wear clothes, okay? There is something in the aging space called activities of daily living. And people who work with people who are getting older measure their ability to live through things called activities of daily living. You may or may not have ever heard of those. One of them is dressing. In that context, many of you in this room won't realize this, but I'll tell you now, it's not easy to put your socks on when you're 63. So what are we doing in the context of our second skin? And this is a serious question, by the way, to make it easier for people as they get older to wear the things they want to wear, to do the things they want to do. Because the second skin area of activity, with all of its impact on the daily life of an individual, impacts strongly on that particular activity of daily living, which is measured as a measure of how people are aging healthily and well. And it isn't easy. I have a bad knee. It is definitely not very easy for me to put my socks on in the morning. And yet the concept of putting your socks on hasn't changed for hundreds of years. What are we doing about it? These things are, to my mind, important. And I put on here, by the way, this old lady sat next to a fire. What are we doing in second skin terms to make her environment less cold? There are thousands of people in this country, it's a shocking shame, that die each winter because of the cold. Is there something we should and could be doing in the context of our second skin to improve their lives? I'm absolutely sure there is. And by the way, that issue is not going to get smaller. There'll be 3.5 million over 65s in this country by 2035. Okay? So a huge number of people. In the other bits of the world, there, of course, it's quite different. There's much more consumerism becoming more important. There's a big middle class growing. But then again, there's an enormous group of people who are poor, who have issues that were described this morning, that we've also got to think, how can we make it such that our second skin contributes to their health and well-being? Yeah, a lot of consumer aspiration, sustainability, massive issue. It was really brilliant that you heard that you said just now that there's a group here working specifically in the context of sustainability and the way in which the fashion business is responding to that issue. By the way, it's an issue which is demanded, I hope, by the people who work in the business as well as the people who support the business from the point of view of buying. It's interesting in many multinationals now. In fact, if you look at the mission statements of the top 24 multinationals in the world, only one of them includes total shareholder return in its mission statement. In 1980, it would have been all of them, and now it's only one. All of the others have a mission statement which relates to purpose, which relates to making lives better. Now, you may not always agree that they do, but nevertheless, that's in their mission statement. And all of us should have, and indeed younger people today, have much more of a purpose in their minds. Communities, it's a very interesting thing that's going on and second skin is going to be really interesting in this context because there are fading borders from the point of view of consumer communities like obviously Facebook, Twitter, and the ability to engage across the world. However, there are people putting walls up which has a sense of nationalism, a sense of separation, and therefore a sense of difference. It's going to be very interesting to see how the second skin business responds to that. There is potential for good. There's a massive potential for tribalism, and yeah, okay, I'll wrap up. Right, I'm going to just talk. So what's all this mean for our second skin? Well, I think you'll get a lot of technology. I mean, already there's a fashion collection 3D printed at home. This is an Adidas trainer, which is 3D printed. All of that stuff's going to come along. Machine learning is allowing you to choose your, giving you a much more direct reference to the things that you like. Air dyeing is a process on cotton for significantly reducing the amount of water being used. And of course, there's VR for deciding what you might do. And in fact, that's the Tesla suit. Anybody heard of the Tesla suit? This is the suit which gives you an enormous amount of personal information as you wear it. You wouldn't want to wear that, would you? I don't think I'd want to wear that. Certainly wouldn't want to go out in it. No socks. That'd be really easy. Who said that? Thank you so much, by the way. Whoever it was listening to me earlier, which is a fantastic thing. There's going to be more functionality, and indeed there's going to be a talk about functionality. I'm sure nanotechnology will find its home in considerable amount of clothing in the end, although it hasn't really so far. That's a graphene dress, by the way, this one on the end here. I think controlling climate in clothes is a crucial thing, and graphene and indeed other nanotechnologies will be important in that context. And wearable tech is a big deal. Chromic changes are also hugely relevant. And in fact, I was at a pitch by a very small company the other night called The Unseen, who are doing considerable amount of work at that boundary between science, art, and clothes. There'll be a lot of underpinning messages around sustainability and sourcing. That along at that end is that's Pinatex, which is a pineapple-based fabric. And at this end, Better Cotton Initiative. I heard this week that Guess, and I think Guess has just joined that Better Cotton Initiative. And then finally, of course, there'll be an agility, which we all know about, agile fashion responses, whether it's through Amazon or Zara or whatever. These are huge changes that will happen in the business. And you'll hear about that in more detail later. Yeah, we don't always get predictions right. In fact, all of these things were completely wrong. In fact, in a drone that you can buy in the shops today, there's a gyro that 10 years ago cost $100,000. And drones today are toys. So we'll always get the pace of change wrong, I suspect. And that's why this second skin business needs to respond so quickly to change. And this is just a final thought. I never think of the future. It comes soon enough. And Albert Einstein said that, so I'm just going to leave you with that thought. I'd like to thank you for listening to me. I hope that was a good scene setter for some of the talks that will come a little bit later. I am Roy Sandbach. I do tweet. I have 3 followers. That's my mother, my daughter, and my sister. So if you wish to join that august group, then you're very welcome. I'm at Prof Roy's, and I work at Newcastle. If anybody wants to talk to me, I'm here until, well, I'm going to be on the panel 3:15. Then I'll have to leave, I'm afraid, because I'm giving another talk on a completely different subject tonight. So I hope I don't use the same one. But if you do want to talk to me, you're very welcome to talk to me at any time. I'm relatively easily available. Thank you.